Viber, we are live.
You're on mute, Weber.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I, on behalf of Students for Liberty South Asia, would like to welcome you all to today's discussion on debunking myths, mental health in young minds. I'm happy to see you all here, and here's hoping for an enlightening and informative session. Let me welcome our panelists for the day. We have with us Mr. Rob Duffy. Rob is an alumnus of SFL and is still peripherally involved with us through some pro bono work. He works as a success and emotional mastery coach with mostly introverts and shy and smart people who want to grow but have some situational anxiety and want to stretch outside their comfort zone. Rob is the founder of Life Choice Solutions with the aim to raise individuals to be strong, confident, and in line with their passion. He has been working with young students and professionals as a life coach. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. We have Ms. Soumya Aggarwal with us. Soumya is the CEO and co-founder of IGenPlus, an initiative focused on building next-generation thought leaders. She believes it is our responsibility to guide them with ancient wisdom and modern insights. She is a young social entrepreneur who believes in Indian spirituality and ethos. She serves as the executive director to Gateway Education, providing affordable and quality education. She has also written several articles in newspapers and web magazines on important national issues. We welcome you, ma'am. We also have Ms. Aneeska Sohal. Aneeska is engaged with student mental health activism in the UK and is based in London. She has just finished her undergraduate degree and is about to start a master's in modern South Asian studies at the University of Oxford. She is the founder and presenter of a mental health podcast called All Things Mental Health. She interviews young people and students discussing how their interests and outlets have helped them to ground their mental health. Her aim is to normalize the discussion around student mental health by exploring how these different outlets have benefited the young people she talks to. Welcome, Aneeska. We look forward to hear from you. Karneet, a local coordinator with SFL, will be moderating today's discussion, while Anshu will be taking the Q&A session towards the end. Please post your questions in the Zoom Q&A chat box during the discussion. I now hand it over to Karneet to moderate this discussion further.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Vaibhav. At the recent era we habituate ourselves in, the mental health aspect really is very critical. Without further ado, I welcome our first panelist, Mr. Robert Duffy. The floor is all yours, sir.
Thank you, and thanks to Dennis and Vaibhav and all the South Asia volunteers in SFL for inviting me to talk about this really important issue. I'd just like to ask people listening to just take a moment with themselves, just to allow whatever is alive within them to come up, because in this session, I guess that things will come up, and perhaps to just allow that reflection, and maybe after the session is finished, maybe you want to write some thoughts and what came up in terms of your feelings down onto a piece of paper and take some time to consider what that might mean for you. Because today we might touch on something that is quite important for someone listening, and perhaps they might be able to learn something valuable about themselves. So I just want to float that out there before we begin. Myself, I've certainly had lots of mental health challenges over the life. I'm definitely a wounded healer, as they call them. I've been in therapy and counseling for prolonged periods in my early life. I suffered with drug addiction. I've had relationship issues. I've suffered with anxiety. And I've really aimed my coaching business now at helping the person that I was struggling back then. That I think of that Rob who was 18, 19, 20, 21, growing up, getting involved in things that I probably shouldn't be getting involved in. And I aim to help people drag themselves away from that, to get to know themselves. And maybe if they're in bad crowds, thinking about, is that the best thing for them? Because my focus is on helping people to know themselves and ultimately love themselves, which is what I didn't do when I was younger. And that's what I do in my coaching business. And I'm a real big fan of talk therapy, helping people really overcome what is happening in their mind. A really wise thing that I learned through my coaching training and practice and self-knowledge was that we are not actually our thoughts. We have thoughts, but we do not have to identify with all of those thoughts. And I think that that's a really, really important point that young people miss. I certainly missed it as a young person. And hopefully today I can share some of my wisdom that I've learned along the way. And thanks for the invite again.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir, for giving a quick introduction about it. I would love to know more about your personal issues and how you coped with it, the mechanisms you've gone for it. I would definitely love to know more about the solutions you've come across.
For sure. So let's open the wounds. So in my life, when I was 18, 19, I didn't really do well in school. Let's call a spade a spade. I wasn't really interested in school. I didn't apply myself in my schooling, and that resulted in me getting a job that I didn't really like. And because of that, I got involved in not a particularly healthy crowd of people. I was taking drugs. I was basically numbing my feelings of self-loathing and anxiety, which I didn't know where it was coming from. And drugs was a great vehicle for me to numb that pain. And when I was 21, an incident happened to me which really changed my life. I was on a holiday in Ibiza and I took quite a lot of drugs, and I ended up falling 4 stories from an apartment block onto the concrete, and my foot was hanging off, my arm was broken. It was rather a traumatic experience. But I sat in that bed after the operation, after they stitched me back together, and I sat in that bed and I said to myself, do you know what? This was your doing, Rob. You made this happen. There's nobody else you can point the finger at and blame. And that was my personal responsibility moment when I said to myself, might be a good idea to make a change in your life here, Rob. And that's what I did. I changed my whole life around. From that day on, I made a commitment to, instead of not really concentrating and focusing on anything in the world, I said, I'm going to aim to provide some value in the world. And I started studying. I got myself into therapy, which was absolutely essential to resolve some of my earlier life issues. And I started studying psychology, which I fell in love with. I changed one addiction to another. I got really addicted to knowing how we work as human beings and how the brain works and how amazing we are as creatures, how powerful we can be. And with the right information and the right mentoring and tutoring, we can really do anything we want. And so from that point on, I changed the circle of friends I was living in. I combated my addictions and I understood myself better. Now, I make that sound very easy, but I really went inwards. What I was doing with myself and how I was relating to myself was dishonest. I was engaging in lots of self-deception. And this can be quite common for young people. Self-deception can be something that we, by default, do almost. We learn to lie to ourselves, and there's many different reasons for that. There's incentives. Maybe our parents might be angry, and we learn to lie to them, and then the lying blends into how we relate to ourselves. So over time, I learned that, do you know what, this isn't serving me. It's not serving me to lie to myself and tell myself that I'm in circles of friends that I don't really like being amongst. And over time, I adjusted those circles of friends. I really got in touch with what I was actually fundamentally interested in. I learned about liberty. That was one of the best things that I did, and I set up a libertarian group here in Ireland, which is fantastic. And that's really important as well. I think as young people, we land in relationships that are proximal, that are people that are just around us. They're not really our tribe. They're not our heart's tribe, as I call it. And those proximal relationships might not be the best things for us, but they act as a comfort in some ways. And I think it's really good for people to ask themselves, what am I getting from the relationships that I'm in? Am I really interested in the same things as people, or do I put on a bit of a show? And I found I was putting on a bit of a show, and I stopped doing that basically, and I was real with myself. I found my chosen tribe of people that are interested in interesting things in the world, and yeah, I've never been happier. I left that horrible job that I didn't like in 2013, and in 2014 I set my business up, and I've really never been happier since. This is the best job ever. I love working with people and helping them crack open their mind to move towards what is really in their hearts that is probably uncovered, but I help them through my coaching uncover what is really important to them in their lives. And that's basically what I've been doing since that incident. That really, I view that incident that happened to me as a real opportunity, and in some ways the best thing that ever happened to me, because I wasn't really going anywhere that I was proud of, and now I am. I've taken my life by the horns, and I'm moving with where my heart takes me, rather than what was default living, if you were. So I hope that is that's my story basically.
Thank you so much, sir, for the thought-provoking presentation. I am really, really glad to know about your story and how you found serenity in what you love doing. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm glad that one is part of the liberty movement. I'm sure that our participants would relate to certain aspects of it. So for our next panelist, Ms. Soumya Aggarwal, I would love to know more the aspects which Mr. Robert Duffy has spoken about mental health, about your perspective on mental health and how an individual or a teenager could tame it.
Right. Thank you so much, Puneet, and the entire team for inviting me here. So the mental health as an issue, I think, has been a point of conversation or a talking point, at least in an outer circle, and generally in organizations and network like Students for Liberty, with the cases that are growing exponentially, and it has been a topic of discussion in recent few years now, which is definitely a positive sign. However, having said that, obviously it's not a part of the day-to-day conversation in the family. It's not a conversation that people have with their family over the dining table, or it's not something that a friend is comfortable sharing it with the other friend. So that is where I think we all of us are missing when it comes when it comes to tackling the issue of mental health as such. As you know, when you're talking about the teenagers, because I work closely with them, teenagers is a very, very crucial age, and all of us have been through that time when our physical body is changing, our emotional, there are a lot of emotional turmoil within us, our hormones are changing, and thus the changes that are happening within us and outside in our physical body leads us to a lot of issues with our with society around us and with the people we network with. So yes, so mental health, there at that age, mental health is definitely one important area of concern, because 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 all the changes that I talked about. Yeah, so stitching my thoughts together, I feel as at that age, it is important that we do introduce the concept to the age group, it becomes a part of the regular schooling system, regular education system, so that when a particular child or a particular teenager is going through certain issues or is going through certain problems, they're able to associate themselves with it, and are able to share it with their concerned people. um, uh, and apart from regular conversation, apart from regular interaction on that issue, I also feel, and that's one of the objectives that we also cover at my organization, is introducing the sense of spirituality to the young students, because we've had a lot of scientific studies showing that certain meditative practices have reduced stress hormones in human beings. And at that age, when they're already going through so many uh, uh, internal changes, it's also important to introduce them to something which will help them stabilize a bit more. um, so that's one. And second, I think that's the second point. So one is definitely increasing the conversation about it, and reduce and removing the stigma out of the conversation of a mental health. And second, introducing spirituality as an everyday aspect of their living, so that they're able to stabilize themselves internally as well. So these are my thoughts, and I would love to answer them more if you have questions.
Um, Ma'am, you actually mentioned about education and how they impact teenagers as such. So recently, what happened was the IB results came and the CBSE results came as well. So obviously, CBSE, most of them got 90%, which is great. But for the IB students, a lot of them didn't actually get good marks, and then they ended up uh, not getting into their colleges. How do you think that would impact them? And what do you think about education as such? How do they impact mental health for students, even for college students?
That I think Robert also mentioned in his life story, where he told about that he thought that he's trying to be a part of the system, but internally he knew that he was just showing it off, and he got a reflection time. And I think the entire education system and the entire mark system is also designed like that, unfortunately. We are forced to believe that above 90% is really the big achievement, and everybody's supposed to have that. And to be a famous man or to be a successful person, uh, you need to score a certain number. Uh, I have, im- so I think it's a vicious circle, but to ensure that the current education system or the entire marks structure does not affect the mental health of the young students, it's very, very important to remove a certain norm and certain taboos that we have associated ourselves with the marking and the exams and the entire cycle of the schooling and the college system. If we can teach the kids, if we can show them that the life is much beyond marks, the life is much beyond the mark sheet that you have in your hand, and if we can train them in believing that particular thought process, I think getting affected because of very small thing in life should not be an issue and should not be a talking point. And and uh, and yeah, I think that's very important. I think all of us have gone through that journey where we wanted to score like a particular number in our class 12th and class 10th, and we were either able to manage to score that much or not able to manage or not able to score that much. And when we reflect back, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, whatever age we are at right now, and reflect back to that moment, I think nobody cares about how many marks did you get, and nobody asks you today कि 12th class में कितने marks आए थे. So eventually it doesn't really matter. It might be helpful for you to get good marks to be in a good college for that particular period of time, but they're giving them a overall holistic perspective of what life is and how to live a life, rather than only focusing on career, rather than only focusing on getting a degree will will help us beat, yeah, and make mental health a positive subject rather than a negative subject.
Okay, so I have another question as well. I'm so sorry. Right. So there have been circumstances where, because of education or because of their life circumstances as such, a child is actually, they don't have much self-esteem or they have a lot of self-esteem. So there are two complete opposites, juxtaposition just present right over there. And because of that, there are certain teenagers as well who tend to do a lot of things, but don't really have one goal where they can go towards. So, because of that, it becomes very chaotic, very messy. What would you suggest at such circumstances? And
Uh,
how would
right. I think for me, Karneet, it could sound like a very individual perspective, but that's what I strongly believe in. One, it's important for us to make the teenagers realize what are they going through and is it worth it or not. Sometimes we know that whatever they're going through is right or wrong, but we don't want to have this conversation with the other person. So if we have the conversation with the other person and make them understand that it is their fault that they're going through a particular feeling and it is their achievement because of which they're able to surpass certain emotions or feelings, it's important that we make them realize that and have this conversation. And second, very very important aspect would be again to uh, make them study themselves, because the current education system, the current societal structure that we have, the international boards, the CBSE board, whatever you talk about, they have a huge syllabus, and they make us understand, they make us understand maths, physics, chemistry, the entire solar system, and multiple other things, which is very very essential for all of us to know, and to have a basic knowledge of what's there around us. But we have failed to teach them what is there in us, and and once we touch upon those important aspects of living, if we touch upon those important aspects of who we are, what it is to be a human being and be in this physical body, I think a lot of the questions and a lot of those struggles that the teenager go through would definitely won't will not be faced as such. So as Robert also mentioned in his life story, there was this moment in his life when he looked past and saw that whatever he was doing was not worth it, and there is much more that he can do with with what is being gifted to him by God. So I think before the teenagers go through all of that, go all of that struggles and they commit those mistakes and go through those challenges, and then they sit and realize and reflect back, because we're talking about it, because we are on a platform where we're discussing these issues. It's also important for us to make uh, make them realize these questions much before they pass through that uh, pool of multiple sharks. Yeah.
so this would be my final question to one. Uh, what was your personal experience with mental health, and why did one start their organization on mental health and the creativity for teenagers? It's actually very intriguing. I really want to know.
So my experience with mental health, to be frank, has not been very tragic as such. So it will be a story without much of spice. And I'm very lucky and blessed that I don't have that story to share. I've lived, like, I was in school, I did my college, and I after that I got into the education sector just after my graduation, and I got into the path of so to say, the path of spirituality, or I experienced meditation when I was 25. And when I was doing all those practices every day, I realized that I have I have spent my life doing something that I sort of don't believe in too much, and I don't agree to, and there is much more passion in me, and there is some there is the passion that I want to follow is something else. So after spending 25, 26 years of my life, I realized that I have to do something else. And I don't, and at that moment, I also felt the need of showing that, giving that perspective to the young teenagers, young students, because it's very unfortunate that I've sort of wasted my life in doing something that everybody else was doing, and realizing that, okay, uh, that's not right after so many years. So I didn't want other students to experience that. I didn't want other students and other teenagers to go through it. I didn't want another generation to spend their 10, 15, 20, 25 years of life doing something that they don't enjoy and they don't want to. And suddenly one day they wake up and say, okay, I need to do something else. And I wasted my entire life doing something else. So that was one reason that I started IGenPlus. And obviously in IGenPlus, we try to cover all the aspects. So to create a holistic human being, by making them creative, by giving them a spiritual journey, by giving them a spiritual experience. And with that, we also prepare them for future skills, future jobs, by giving them relevant skills. So yeah, that's been my journey.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the enriching perspective one has. It's truly inspiring, and I've learned a lot from this. Thank you so much. So our next panelist, Miss Aneeska Sohal. Uh, Ma'am, I would love to know about your perspectives as well, about your podcast. It sounds intriguing as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me first, guys. I'd like to thank South Asia Students for Liberty for having me, but also to sort of be doing such an important and much needed student mental health webinar as well. I think too, it's a real honor to sort of share this space with my fellow panelists as well, who also specialize in mental health based work. And I'm sure we all kind of hope together that we can help break down the stigma surrounding mental health too. For those of you who've just joined, I'm Aneeska Sohal. I'm engaged with student mental health activist work in the UK, and I'm the presenter of a mental health podcast. And I'm just about to start my master's at the University of Oxford. My interest and engagement with student mental health in particular began as the president of the University of York branch of the student mental health charity Student Minds. Student Minds is the UK's leading student mental health charity. And what we do is we empower students and members of the university community to develop the knowledge, confidence, and skills to really look after their own mental health, but also sort of support others and help to create change as well. I now work on national projects across the UK to help break down that taboo around student mental health, working with this charity at the same time. So that's kind of my background for you guys. Now I'm the sort of the founder and the presenter of this podcast series called All Things Mental Health. And what I do is I interview different students and young people, and we discuss how their interests and their outlets really help to ground their mental health. And these outlets and interests really span across the board, from music to working in art galleries to sport, dance, charity work, community work. And it sort of gives a platform to sort of shows you through these interests and outlets, is kind of the aim, is to sort of show you how it really supports these people with their mental health day to day through engaging with these different things. And you don't always think about how these interests you have could actually be implemented into a routine to really support you with your headspace as the days go on as well. And can be really beneficial, I think, as well when the stress levels increase too. You guys were saying how lots of results have come out at the moment, so times like that, where you have these different things to really help you to sort of stay grounded and stay focused. I think one of the best things about this series I've found recently is how it's really opened up a very honest conversation with these young people and these students, not just about how these outlets help their mental health, but also, you know, what their mental health state is really like. and they really open up and are very honest about their backstories, like everyone has sort of been so far today on the panel. The aim of the whole thing really is to, and any other work as well that I do nationally, is the aim to basically sort of normalize the discussion around student mental health by exploring basically how these different outlets have benefited these different people. We unpack the different sort of benefits, the struggles as well. And we hope that by people kind of listening to this podcast, they might think about also dipping into these outlets and interests that have helped other people and consequently might also help them as well. And the work that they will do is very inspiring to hear about. Some of them are also engaged in other mental health based work or just talk about their own struggles too. So to see how these different outlets have really helped them has been a real bonus too.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I had one question regarding it. So I actually heard the podcast, one of them, and then it's really, really good. But I would love to know what's one of the, unique situation you've come across, and how did you discuss it with them?
For sure, for sure. One that really sort of hit home for me was, so in series 1 of the podcast that you guys can find actually on Spotify under All Things Mental Health, and also on Instagram, as there's an artistic component that goes along with the audio as well, helping to kind of bridge divides and bridge kind of boundaries of mental health through these different interesting mediums, and that's at allthings.mentalhealth on Instagram as well. But one of the episodes that you'll see on there was from a student called Jacob, and he works at a hospital radio, and we discussed this in series 1. He features on one of the episodes. And what was really interesting about that is he was telling me about how he walks through the different wards of the hospital and takes different song recommendations and chats to different patients, working out, what songs they want to hear, why that particular music has really helped them with their mental health, how it can perhaps bring them some solace and comfort now in a time that's really difficult for them, being in this hospital environment. And what's great about that is that he then goes back to the radio station, puts it on, and you can just, he's sort of shown me little video snippets and spoken to me about that experience of seeing how it's really benefited the person there who can then listen to something. And you're taking time out to actually form a dialogue with the person. I think that's the sort of the main thing here really, is what the other panelists have really said as well, is having these conversation streams going where people can feel open about their mental health, talk about it, and someone can think about a way of helping them there and then. And in this very kind of stressed environment of a hospital, he's managed to help someone by putting on some music that really, really kind of comforts them. And that story in particular really hit home for me.
So ma'am, what's your personal experience with mental health? And if you, how would you describe mental health? What do you see mental health as?
Sure. So I started university about 3 years ago now. And for me, that was the first time I really engaged with mental health properly, I think. I was always kind of aware that at school they teach us that your mental health being your headspace, how can you look after that in relation to your physical health? But it was always something that was just kind of spoken about. Nobody really engaged with it to work out how you actually do that. It was just kind of there. Going to university was the first time of having to experience levels of, there's academic stress before, for sure, like getting into university, but dealing with it all the time on your own as well, in the sense that your family isn't there all the time, you're more isolated. Also things like social exhaustion, which I don't think people always think is a problem when it comes to university, and social isolation as well. Like, as much as it's meant to be this engaging space that you can make friends in, it can actually be really difficult to do that. But also, even if you manage to do that, it can be quite draining as well. Like, how do you also look after your own headspace at the same time as investing time in meeting so many different new people as well? So I think going to university for me was when I really engaged with mental health too. But I think in terms of what you said about, what it is in relation to kind of what I think as well, by bridging those two things together. So in terms of thinking about, I'm saying that your mental health is like your headspace and how you can learn to look after that. one thing that I've seen across university, and my main aim for all the different work I really do as well, is to think about how students can really help other students through sharing their experiences with each other and forming this very powerful collaborative student voice that's really uniting this front to do with student mental health by coming at it in a very strong collective way, because other students understand what you're going through as well, and consequently if you can learn to sympathize with each other and use your experiences in a really good way to help someone else, that's great, and you're making a positive impact and really benefiting someone on the other end. And also people are likely to, what I've really seen through all the work I've done over the past sort of 5 years is people are more likely to listen to you as well, because you're also going through things that they also go through. And naturally human beings sympathize too and can empathize, and consequently, you know, you can really give what you've experienced to really help the next person as well. So along with that, sort of, you know, my specialism is also kind of creating sort of mental health resources, or sort of headspace based resources that are kind of artistic as well as being sort of audio based in terms of the podcast. There are also artistic components of that as well. So there's an illustrator who responds to each of the podcast episodes, which gets posted on Instagram as well. And consequently, you can it's trying to show you that you can tap into mental health based care through these normal interests that people have, such as art and listening to things and music and stuff like that. So normalizing it even more through these different activities too.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your beautiful words. Furthermore, the peer-to-peer uplifting really does sound incredible. We shall now proceed with the Q&A session led by another SFL local coordinator, Anshul Rathor. I shall now hand it over to him.
Thank you, Karneet. That was a really insightful and wonderful session that we had. So now I'll be proceeding towards our Q&A session. And I think I have quite a lot of questions here. So, this is my first question, and this question goes to Robert. This is from my side. As a child abuse survivor, I somehow understand what trauma, what trauma it causes to one emotionally, and it took years for me to cope up with this fact. So my question is, how one should try to cope one trauma without getting completely fixated on it?
Great question. So for me, I obviously only talk about myself. The biggest challenge that I had was that I ignored it and I didn't process it for years. I didn't allow myself believe it. I obviously used drugs as a great numbing technique, and this is something that young people do quite a lot in a lot of different ways. They ignore the problem and they use TV, games, porn, all sorts of different things to basically numb the feeling. And that's really the worst thing that we can do, because we push it into the underground of our subconscious and we tell ourselves basically that this is a bad thing, I shouldn't deal with this. When the best thing to do is actually to face the fire and run towards it, ask for help, you know, look for people around us who we can talk to that will hear us. I know that people that have suffered trauma are very sensitive to all kinds of judgments, and they're sensitive to well, they're quite sensitive a lot. It can lead to that, but the best thing to do is to really find some compassionate source that will hear you. If there's a availability of resources, some care resources, some psychological interventions that you can make the most of, and to aim to reframe the story, because the framework that I work on is that basically our feelings, how we're feeling, is coming from our thoughts. So if we're having thoughts and we're ruminating on, oh, this was bad, and we have a negative story in our mind and we keep telling ourselves that negative story. We might be engaging in a bit of victimhood. I certainly engaged in a lot of victimhood. And that's just not helpful. Like, I know as a trauma, someone who's experienced trauma, and we all have traumas like this, there's a stigma even around trauma. Everybody who's a human being has some form of trauma. Being birthed is a traumatic experience. So, you know, we all have trauma, but it's how we are framing it in our mind. What's the story that we're telling ourselves about the trauma in terms of the impact that it's having in our lives? And if we can really wrestle with that narrative that we have and find something more accepting, like when I used to regret what happened to me, the fall, and I was like in a regretful mode. And one day I said, why am I regretting this? This has offered me a new life for myself. This is probably the best thing that ever happened to me. I shifted a really horrendous experience to something that is amazing. And out of that came, you know, post-traumatic growth, they call it. And I would try to view the trauma in that way. Obviously working with someone in a professional manner, how can you change the narrative that you tell yourself around the trauma to something that is working for your better future? Something that is going to help you move forward in an empowered way rather than a struggling and fighting against yourself, because we can turn our struggles into positives if we reframe that. And rather than resisting and regretting things, you know, I think young people, especially, helping them to understand and grow their own emotional literacy, which is basically understanding accurately what is happening inside. I think that's one of the most important things that we can do. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was perfect answer that we had. Basically, face your problem head on instead of escaping from it.
Mm.
Okay, the next question, I think all of you can share your perspective on it. How talk therapy will help a student who is struggling for his goals for many years? Maybe Soumya, maybe we can start from Soumya.
Uh, the question is, how would talk therapy help a person?
Yeah. How talk therapy will help student who is struggling for his goals for many years?
Oh, for me, talk therapy is I think is the best solution to come and talk to a person who can guide you to the right path. Is definitely the right way. I for a talk therapy, it's important to identify a person who can ask you a right set of questions, which will make you reflect on the right answers. So it's a combination. It's very essential to have the right person who can instigate those thoughts in you and make you think through what's going on in you. So I think talk therapy, going by what I believe, talk therapy is one of the best ways to identify um, your goals and your struggles and what is stopping you from what you want to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Aneeska, I'd like to know your perspective on it.
Sure. So I think I agree. Talk therapy is really important. I think that whether that's on a professional level, obviously that can be very beneficial and really can help someone get to the core of the problem. But at the same time, finding communication outlets that you can talk to day as well in your own circles too, whether that's a family member or a friend, or like I was saying earlier, like a fellow student who also understands what you're going through as well. In lots of institutions, there are different groups that you can touch base with as well, where you can basically tap into the importance of sort of talking and sharing things. So I know, for example, in the UK, we have student minds, like I was saying to you guys, and how this works is there are different outlets in different universities, and consequently there's always a platform where you can go and they can signpost you to mental health support, such as talk therapy based things, but also ignite that within themselves, within that student community. So I think the importance of communication as well, because like I was saying earlier, through communicating and talking to someone, that would also help them at the same time. That, like I said, people are also going through similar things you were going through. So you never know what might happen if you start to be open. It encourages a person along the way to be open as well. And consequently, there's this domino effect. And that's something I've really seen through these different interviews I've done, is the importance people have found in just being honest. I think talk therapy also comes from you wanting to be honest with yourself about the problems you're having. And that in and of itself is very difficult. It's very easy to try and repress any problems that you have because of pressures that you have, for example, schooling or academic work or friends, whatever it might be, a job. But if you learn to listen to your headspace and your body as well, because your physical health can sometimes also respond to your mental health too, is understanding to listen to that and tap into it. And a lot of the time through communicating, that is a first step to really help you as well.
Thank you for your perspective, Aneeska. I'd like to Mr. Rob to share his perspective on this. How talk therapy will help student who is struggling for his goals for many years.
Sure. So having done, I'd say, 24 months in total of talk therapy, I'm a massive proponent of talk therapy. Like Aneeska said, it really allows you the ability to become honest with yourself. And that was something that I struggled with a lot. And in terms of your goals, and this is something that I obviously in my coaching help my clients with, working towards the future. Perhaps the reality is that you're biting off a little bit more than you can chew, and that your goals are too big. They're a little bit too overwhelming. Talk therapy can help you with that. Coaching can also help you with it. But talk therapy for me allowed me to understand who I was. So the framing around where I was going with my future was pretty dark, and therapy allowed me to paint a much brighter picture. It gave me confidence in my ability to overcome the challenges and to see myself in a different light than I was looking in. My focus was narrowly focused on being stuck, and there was that sense of stuckness that I had to work on. And talk therapy definitely can help you understand where it is that you're working towards, because a lot of the time the challenge is really getting clarity on what it is that you want. And it might seem trivial, but it's a very, very difficult question to really grapple with. And a precursor to asking that question, which is part of my coaching program, is that I get people clear on who they actually are rather than what do they want. I think if we don't know who we are, it's really hard to answer the question of what we want. So I think maybe doing a bit of a deep dive into asking those questions around who are we authentically really helps to answer that question of what it is that we want in our future. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. So the next question is for Ms. Soumya. How to cope with poor access to mental health care in developing world and social stigma surrounding mental health care, because of which people avoid seeking help?
It's a complex question to answer, how to avoid the social stigma. I think one of the best ways to have conversation like the one that we're having right now, and to make people believe that mental health is an issue to be talked about and to think and have this conversation where we have experts who are coming who's speaking about the issue and sharing their experiences, and also knowing that there are a lot of people who are going through something like that, and there are people who have gone through certain issues and have come out of it. So that's a sense of realization where you can belong and you can associate yourself with the other person. I think that's definitely one way of removing the social stigma and making the conversation more open. And yes, I believe also incorporating certain advertisements in the place where family goes. For example, we have that like smoking advertisement that's been shown on the theater whenever we go there. So we can have a similar advertisement of not like the same, but yes, but an advertisement on mental health being shown on shown where family goes together, and it can be then become like a topic that has to be talked about. So certain bold steps will have to be taken by people to so that people who don't know about it, who don't know that the problem exists, start getting to know about it. And also for all of us who understands uh, uh, the problem, who understands the depth of the problem, are also able to talk to and communicate it to other people more openly and more frankly. So having more conversations, having more public conversations like these, and having more public outreach through advertisements on platforms where family come together, where people sit together and watch certain things. So that could be the way, and definitely making it an important part of school curriculum, because every child has to go through that and does go through that. So if you make it part of the school curriculum, either we add it as an independent subject, or like 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 a lab or something, we can think of a plan and make it a part of the school system anyhow. So these are the 3 ways I feel the stigma can then be removed.
That was a really good perspective on it. And the next question is there. This is for Miss Aneeska. What do you like? What do you have suggestion for the students who are dealing with a low self-esteem and self-doubt?
Sure. Okay. I think the first thing is kind of working out, like we said initially, sort of being honest about that. So first, sort of being honest about this lack of self-esteem and sort of self-doubt that you have. But finding different outlets to sort of talk to other people about this as well. I think people sometimes don't always know what institutions can offer them. I think this is something I also didn't know either. So for example, in terms of a sort of lack of self-esteem and sort of self-doubt in relation to, let's say, academia, when you go to university, there are different outlets there that can help you globally as well, whether that's forms of pastoral care or different platforms that you can speak to and stuff like that. So it's finding, sort of tapping into those as well. A lot of the time, there are lots of also anonymous online things which can transcend any sort of space, because they're quite globalized too. So there's a space called the Whiteboard Space, which has just been launched in different universities across the globe as well. And you can tap into that, and specialists can talk to you without you having to register for a therapy session, for example, to deal with things like that. You can speak to a specialist via the internet and have a conversation like that if that's more comfortable for you, especially in dynamics where you're not comfortable speaking to somebody in person or you can't do that. And yeah, I think sort of finding different outlets to really help yourself to deal with those things too. And also trying to maybe realize where this comes from. If you have lots of levels of self-doubt, what is it? Is it an academic thing? Is it something about, is it a social thing? Is it an anxiety in social spaces? Or where does this resonate from? And again, it's like what me and Rob were saying about being honest with yourself about that. Someone once said to me, try and look at yourself from the outside in. So imagine if you were sort of, it might sound a bit bizarre, but it does help. If you think about looking at yourself from another perspective, if it was someone else giving you that advice, or if you're just looking at yourself from sort of an outside body looking in, really, if you're another person looking at yourself, basically, and trying to get yourself in the shoes of that other person, looking at yourself really critically and saying, okay, I'm experiencing levels of self-doubt, levels of anxiety. If I look at that person, well, what is it about that? Well, where does this come from? Does it get heightened in certain scenarios? Okay, why is it heightened in those scenarios? What can I do to help myself in those scenarios? So I think being self-reflective is also something that can really help you to understand where it stems from, because if you can't understand where it stems from, then working out how to help yourself can be quite hard. So sort of trying to reflect in some ways from personal experience, but from other people who share their stories on this podcast, it seems that this can be quite beneficial too.
Can I say something on that as well?
Yeah, so go ahead.
So I'm a big fan of journaling, and journaling basically is just writing having a practice of writing your thoughts down every day. I spend at least 15 minutes writing my thoughts down and becoming aware of what is the chatter in our minds. It's really valuable to be able to do that, and a lot of the doubt that comes in life is from largely unconscious narratives that maybe we didn't decide to put there in the first place. And what journaling does is it allows us to become conscious of what has remained unconscious, maybe for a long time. And the process of actually becoming very aware on a page in front of you that you believe something that you might not want to believe and that might not serve you at all is a really powerful process. So I'm always encouraging my clients to become aware of what it is that they're saying to themselves about themselves. Because a lot of the times, and I found this, and I still find it to this day, that there's things in there that I don't want to believe about myself. And the great thing about that is that we can change our mind. If we believe something that is not helpful and it brings us down and it makes us feel icky and disempowered, we can change our mind about that. And we're allowed to say, actually, do you know what? I'm going to build a bridge and I'm going to believe this empowering vision of myself instead. And I think that's a really good thing to start practicing. I do it for 15 minutes every day and it's really helpful.
That was brilliant. Now, Vaibhav, I have some questions to ask. So, floor is over to you, Vaibhav.
Yes, so I have a question, and any of you might choose to answer it. So, very recently, we saw young students who graduated class 10th and class 12 here in India, and they have these career choice ahead of them, and a lot of people are really confused about what to do. They have some, maybe some societal norms they would want to conform to, or a lot of peer pressure might be there. So maybe if some of you can suggest, as to how should a young teenager who is, planning to choose their college should go about it. What should they consider, and is it really something they should worry or stress too much about, or they can obviously make some changes later on when they are maybe more aware of what they want to do. So any of you, or maybe all three of you, can maybe touch upon this.
So definitely the students, they should not worry about or stress about it, but they should definitely think through it before making a decision. Because usually when we make these decisions, we try to follow a herd mentality, where we tend to do what the other friends or the other peers are doing, and miss out on our emotional passion and on our strengths. So to all the students who've just given their class 12th especially, and also to the students who've graduated from class 10th, it's very, very important to sit with your mentors, to sit with someone who can help you identify your strengths, your weaknesses, who can guide you through what is right for you, and accordingly make the decision. Uh, it is also very, very essential to, I am sure a lot of people must be saying that, you must be hearing it from through through many sources, but do tie the knot and do follow it, that you won't do something just because the other people are asking you to do it, because your uncle and your aunt says that engineering is better than doing a BBA, or being a doctor is better than doing like a BSc in biology. So it's important that you understand what you want to do, what's your interest area. You might not have a bigger goal and a bigger picture right now, and once you start, get into college, you meet new friends, these things do change at that age. But do identify that what's your interest, what's your strength, and accordingly pick up the career that you feel will help you grow. And second, don't fall to what others are thinking. The others, whatever they're saying to you, they'll come and they'll go, but your career, your life, your decisions will stay with you. So do give a lot of thought, meet a lot of people whom you think will give you right advice, who will make you think about your personality type, your strengths, and then make a decision on the right of the right path.
So similarly, I would really recommend trying lots of things. I was probably late to the party in understanding what it was that I wanted to do for my career. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I decided that I really like helping people understand themselves more. But when I was younger, I tried quite a few things. I played sports. I was interested in music. I dabbled with some computers and stuff like that for a small degree. I played guitar and I sang in bands, and I love doing that stuff. So I would really recommend that people, they try things, and because that's how we grow. We grow when we try new things and we find out what it is that we're actually passionate about and what brings us our bliss and our joy. And that requires us, unfortunately, to get out of our comfort zone, which is something that people are quite reluctant to do. But unless we get out of our comfort zone and really try different things that we might not be good at, we're not going to know exactly where our strengths and our weaknesses are. So I view 20s, when we graduate from university, well, when most people graduate, those are the times to really try as many things as possible to see what it is that takes you in, where your heart sings, what are the activities that you really love doing, because nobody can answer that question for you. A lot of the time, young people can be quite risk averse. They don't want to try something because they might find that they're not very good at it. And I think that's wrong, because though even those types of things where it's like a failure, we should view failures as feedback rather than something to run away from. We should run towards failure, and understanding what is actually not for us is good knowledge for us to be able to say, okay, that's a tick box I can check off the list. I've tried it, I don't like it, let me try something else. And over time, the more that we try new things, the more we know where our heart is centered. And I think it's very important to try as much as possible, because when you're young, you've the opportunity to do that. When you get a little bit older, other things come online, and it's not really possible for you to try as many things. So that would be my advice.
I completely agree as well with what both of you have said too. I think it's important to take your time with it, and I think it seems like across the globe, people don't advise you to take your time. Society advises you to quickly go from one thing to the next thing. You need to be 110% prepared for the next thing, and that seems to be the way forward. Which actually, that's not the way to do it. You're the one who has to do the job or do the degree. And if you're not sure what that is, then there's nothing wrong with that. It's important to find the right thing for you. It's not like your friend is doing it or your parent is doing it. It's you. And I remember at school, we had the same problem where they really encouraged you to quickly move from your schooling to your university. And nobody really spoke to you about any other thing you might want to do, whether that's a job or taking some time out and applying a bit later to university or whatever. And I remember what I wanted to do straight away. And I sat with a teacher and I said, you're making me fill out this university form and I'm not 100% confident about what I want to do. And I would like, ideally, I think when I self-reflect, I think I realized I would actually like more time. And it took a bit of time for them to understand that as a concept, because nobody really did that at school. But it was the best thing I did, to take out a little bit extra time and then apply for university a little bit later. I spent a year doing basically what Robert said, working in different fields, from arts-based things to museums, to architecture work, mental health-based things, lots of different stuff. And what was good about that is it forced you to work out, okay, I have this time, what are my interests? How am I going to fill it? And it's like what Rob was saying, you learn who you are, you work out what these different things, different interests that you have, and why you want to turn to them, what is it that they benefit. that who's been a benefit, to you through them. And I came out the other side doing a degree where I specialised in Mughal architecture, and I never thought that would be something I'd ever end up doing. And now I'm doing an MA where I developed that further. But it is the right path for me, but I was not aware of that 3 years ago. But by taking some time out to understand it, I'm now going into it with a lot more confidence. So I think taking out some time is really important.
Thank you so much for the panel. So there's a question which I really liked and I really wanted to ask everyone. I can totally relate to Chidi from The Good Place. I can't decide due to this. I'm having a lot of problems. Now I have to settle with what people choose for me. I have the fear of failure. Sometimes I feel if only I could make up my mind, what should I do? This is open for the entire panel. Anyone can answer it.
So I am not familiar with the show The Good Place or Chidi, but I would recommend viewing failure in terms of not something to be afraid of, like I mentioned, because you know this is a very common thing in our society that we and it stops a lot of people going into entrepreneurship and setting up enterprises. And I battled with this a lot at the start. I viewed myself as failing compared to, we compare ourselves, and there's a evolutionary dynamic between comparing ourselves to everybody else. But if we lean into comparing ourselves to everybody else, we'll never be able to truly identify what our own capacity is. And it comes back to being true to ourselves and honest with ourselves. What are we aiming at? Are we setting ourselves unreal expectations? Because for me, failure is beautiful. I fail all the time, and I love it. I laugh at it now. It's something that I think we have to get used to, and it grows our resilience. Because if we're just winning all the time, life isn't really a challenge. So I think integrating and having a different relationship with failure, and let's break down what it means. What does actual failure mean? Because there's a precursor to answering that question, because it's failure in relation to what or whose expectations. And if you're setting unreal expectations for yourself, maybe you need to have a discussion with yourself. So for me, failure is in a way beautiful, because you've tried something, you've learned something, and you're able to move on knowing and integrating a piece of experience in your life. So that's what I'd say.
I really agree with Rob on that as well. And also, it's the only way you can really grow too. Like, it's part of life. Whether that's something you fail at some point when you're younger, whether it's later, but you have to learn how to deal with that in relation to your mental health as well. And the sooner you do that, the better it can really be. But again, it's like we've said throughout the session, it's important to understand who you are, and are you linking this failure to a wider societal thing? And also, nothing is concrete. You can move with these things. You can take it. It might be a good thing that you didn't actually, something didn't work out for you straight away. It might put you on another pathway. I've experienced that. And like I said to you guys in the last answer, I've benefited a lot from that, from being put in a different direction that was deemed by a school as failure. Consequently, I completely disagree. So I think, understanding yourself in relation to things, the more you tap into that, the easier it becomes to confront these things, and embracing the failures and the fear as much as you embrace doing well, because you're not going to grow otherwise. It's just the way it is, I'm afraid. So yeah, I think learning to work with them is something that's really, really important.
I have one last thought to add to this, that failure, what looks today as a failure, won't look the same tomorrow. So if you're going through a rough patch, just be at it, because tomorrow you'll be really grateful for that, whatever happened to you. So yeah, just be at it and be patient, and tomorrow you will see another perspective of the failure.
That was a really a wonderful insight that all of you shared on this perspective. And now I'd like to ask Vaibhav to take over from here.
Yeah, thank you, Anshu. So this brings us to the last leg of this webinar, and I would really just ask every one of you to give your concluding remarks as to what should a young person who's going through some mental trauma, some mental stress, what should they do, who should they approach, and what is the way forward after this webinar. So some concluding remarks quickly from each one of you, starting with Robert.
Yeah, so thank you guys for inviting me to talk about this. This is, it's really important, obviously, to my life, and the experience that I had as a child growing up and a youth growing up. I wouldn't want that to be re-experienced by anybody else. And a couple of things that are really important to me to maybe mention that we mightn't have covered is that there's a responsibility for parents to sort of think about what type of child that they want to be raising in the world. A lot of the time it can be unconscious that they have a mentality that they want to raise someone who is more on the obedient side rather than thinking of the future of the child. And if your philosophy is to raise an obedient child, your child might suffer and not be able to be successful in life. I'm not saying that it's absolute, but there is a trade-off almost in raising a child with more of a forceful energy, and I think that is very important for parents to keep in mind. I'm a big fan of doing audits. So if you're a young person and you're finding that your time and your focus is being challenged in some ways, I'm a big fan of auditing that. So what I mean by auditing it is to really get clear on what is taking up your time, what you're spending your attention on, where your focus is going throughout the day. To really get clear, I like to do it over a weekend just to get clear on what it is taking up my time, because sometimes we will become aware, if we do that a lot of our time is leaking away into pursuits that are not serving our best interests. So that is something really important. And finally, one of the biggest things that is important for me and that I really try to help people get better at is their own sense of emotional literacy. How to accurately define what is happening emotionally inside. I think it's really important, because if we are not doing that, that can lead us to do all types of unconscious behaviors, procrastinate, and maybe numb ourselves and dull our feelings if we're not clear on who we are. An interesting quote that an author I really respect called Daniel Goleman said, and this relates to the educational institutions as well. He said, "Emotional literacy programs improve children's academic achievement scores and school performance. When too many children lack the capacity to handle their upsets, to listen or focus, and to rein in their own impulse, to feel responsible for their work or care about learning, anything that will buttress these skills will help their education. And in this sense, emotional literacy enhances schools' ability to teach." And I think that that's really wise. And I think that far too often in educational institutions that is overlooked. It's very, get your grades, get your assignments in on time, and they sort of sidestep what is happening for the person deep down. And I think that that's wrong. And I think as a society, we need to do something about that. But again, thank you very much for inviting me here. I've really enjoyed the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Maybe now we can come to Soumya and listen to her concluding remarks.
To the question that you asked, Vaibhav, for all the students who are going through some rough patch or traumatic experience right now, um, uh, just talk and identify the people with whom you can share all of this. There are a lot of experts, there are online help. Rob and Aneeska are already working in interacting with young students. I, in an organization, are helping students by helping them identify their strengths, their creativity, and building their skills. So so do get in touch with us. Do get in touch with the organization Students for Liberty, the dynamic team, and they can definitely help you in attaching you with the right expert as per the problem that you're facing. And to conclude, I think as a subject, mental health, it's important that we don't look at mental health not only from the negative perspective, but also as the positive, from the positive angle. Because once you have very positive mental health, it can do wonders to you. So when we're talking about mental health as a whole, as a subject, we should not only cover the negative experiences, the negative side to it, but also the positive side to it. Just like we talk about our physical health, we don't talk about diseases as much as we talk about exercise, or the things, or dieting, or nutrition, health, food, etc. We should also ensure that we keep that balance while talking about mental health whenever we are talking. So yeah, and at the end, thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure talking to the experts and interacting. Thank you.
Really nice thought, Soumya. That we should talk about mental health as we talk about the physical health. After all, it's just part of our body, and why should we refrain from talking about mental health when we are talking about curing our diseases and getting to a better lifestyle? So with that, let's move on to Aneeska and listen to her concluding remarks before we end this.
Thank you so much, Vibhav. What I would say first is, for anyone who is, whether it's experiencing a difficult time right now with their mental health, you have an interest in mental health, or anyone who's tuned into this webinar, first thing I'd say is check out all the different outlets that all our panelists are sort of working on as well. The three of us, all our work is linked to mental health. The whole aim of it is to help you with it. So that's something straight away that you can go and check out that might be a benefit to you. And all our different work, as you've heard, is all quite varied as well. So something might suit you quite well and might help someone else, etc. I know all the stuff that we're all doing is also signposted on the poster for this event. So I'm sure kind of checking that out by searching it on the web or social media platforms, and hopefully that might be a benefit too. On the note of student mental health, I would say something really important is looking at this idea, which is something I really advocate, and all my work is kind of geared towards, is for students, by students, and the idea that, what happens if you guys use your issues that you have by coming together, talking to another student, another friend, sharing your stories, and not to be scared to create platforms and spaces with your friends to do that. Because I think, as much as different outlets might also help you, like we've said, sometimes certain issues that you find in your university or your school or your institution might also be a localized problem, and maybe a couple of you are experiencing a similar mental health issue that stems from the same issue within the institution. So if you talk about it, you might find ways of using your experience to help combat that, and it's a way of localizing the mental health support, which I think is very important, because different spaces work in different ways. So I think it's important to work out how you can deal with the space around you that might be different to your friend who perhaps is in another city experiencing another problem in another institution. But I think as well that, like I was saying to you guys earlier, it really shows you this power of a very collaborative student voice and the positive benefits that can have. Someone else might open up because you have, which can help save someone else or help someone else. So really uniting that as well. But also I think another thing is trying to normalize it as much as humanly possible, especially in societies that it's a massive taboo and stigma. And, it's building in mental health care, whether that's, so for example, for me, that's like taking out 30 minutes where every day, like different bits of the day, I'll put in like maybe 3-4 sessions of 30 minutes where I turn to different things to help me. So whether that's like reading an article or listening to a podcast or singing or whatever it might be. And that really helps me with my mental health care every day. So building it into your daily routine, like you brush your teeth, like it's that important. If you'll see the benefits of it and you'll be really grateful when it becomes difficult for you, or even if you're experiencing difficulties now, that you are tuning in and working out ways to really help yourself as well. So yeah, that's what I'd say. But thank you so much, guys, for having me and for sort of being a part of such a great and important discussion as well.
Great. Thank you, Aneeska. And guys, do remember to brush your teeth and take care of your mental health while you're at it, because as she said, it's an everyday thing and we shouldn't be avoiding our mental health. Right. So with that, this brings us to the very end of this webinar, and I would now hand it over to Anshu for his remarks.
Thank you, Vaibhav. Now we are nearing our closing time, and it was really a very insightful session that we had today. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Mr. Rob, Ms. Soumya, and Ms. Aneeska, for being part of this discussion and sharing their insights, knowledge, experiences regarding this very important issue of mental health and how to address it. I'd like to thank SFL, Dennis, and Vaibhav for organizing this discussion. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of the participants for attending it. It was a pleasure to have all of you today. Thank you. Be safe, promote peace, love liberty, and have a compassion to each other. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, guys.